citizen, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome to another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast. Each week we have extraordinary solutionaries. Others look at all the problems of the world. We're seeking solutions. Today we have a very special guest. We have a wonderful guest, Rufo. He is from Italy, but I think you're now, living in Geneva. Is that right?
Correct.
Correct. Good. And Rufo heads the Trustless Computing Association. Now, generally, we think we want to build trust, but I think the key here is that in the computer era, when we're on the computer, we can't just trust everything we see. We need some way to verify it. And he's doing this as part of an initiative to plant the seeds for a global democratic governance. You know, we want global democratic governance, and all of us are going to be collectively involved. We've got to be able to trust that all of us are who we say we are here, and we're interacting. We're not some bot. So we're very pleased to have Rufo with us. Let's go into, how did you get into this? I mean, there's so many people working in the computer sphere trying to solve computer problems, but who don't necessarily think of themselves as world citizens. They're just thinking about the security aspects. What led you to be focusing on global citizenship?
So it all started about 20 years ago when I met Troy Davis, the son of Gary Davis in New York. Shortly before I got into world politics and world democracy, and after I met him, I understood that the main goal of my life would have been to promote world democratic institutions. And at the same time, there was the internet boom. And so it was quite clear to everyone that just by leveraging the internet, it could be a global village, and everyone could actually interconnect, and you could have automatically a world democracy. I worked with Troy for his World Citizen Foundation. I represented it at some global events like the World Social Forum, which was very influential in the early 2000s. And I interconnected with many different activists on this quest. So since then, I established several startups and associations to use technologies to enable people globally to interconnect and democratically organize, deliberate together, practice democracy, with the main goal to enable people across the world to come together and work democratically towards a global democracy.
And that just sounds like a fantastic goal. I mean, how do we enable people around the world, like us here in this Zoom conference, we're interacting, how do we begin to have actually the tools to be able to scale that up so we can interact this way globally and begin to build a bottom-up democracy? That is the key to what Gary Davis was talking about, and so glad that you got to work with his son, who has similar views and is also working for global democracy. So tell us more about how you see moving forward with creating something like that that's so important for the planet.
Yeah, so apparently it seemed like all you needed to have is just something like Facebook, where people can come together, discuss, gather, create groups, and distill their wisdom together, right? So it seems quite obvious that the internet was going to automatically enable people to come together. Everyone could be a newspaper, everyone could aggregate with others, but it wasn't so easy. And we learn it today. We learned it after Snowden, we learned it after Capitol Hill on January 6th. So throughout the years, we built technology that would enable people to vote online, deliberate, so that the discussions online wouldn't be just trolling and kind of meaningless, but would actually lead to organizing online. When Snowden, Edward Snowden in 2013 revealed the extent of surveillance that it's embedded in all the technologies, and how broken our privacy and even the security of all the technologies are, it became clear that that was not enough. So it was not enough to make our discussion spaces online more conducive to democratic discussion. You needed to really solve the root insecurity of these systems, which are, they don't respect your privacy, they're not secure, they don't enable voting, and they're completely manipulated by many different actors.
Very good point. That's an excellent point, an excellent challenge, because I think that is now really emerging as the biggest key problem in the world right now as we face the incredible uncertainties that we're working with, and the disruptions and the dislocation that have come out of the social media that have put us all in they say silos. How do you see addressing that? How do you see breaking down cross cultural and cross border communications that get beyond the siloing effect we're seeing in social media?
Yeah, so basically the main problem for democratic organizing globally towards a global democracy, on one side is the social media, and how basically powerful nations and powerful companies can basically completely influence the global discussion and our opinions and so on to pursue their goals. There's also 1% of persons which are elected officials, influencers, journalists, which are critical to a democratic society, which have additional problem. Not only their influence through social media, they may think they're smarter than social media influence, but they're actually manipulated by spying and being unable to have secret discussions. And so you have this kind of influence. So you have two concurrent problems. One is that the social media is not at all creating the democratic discussion space that we need to create a democratic discussion. And you have the 1% which need the security and privacy that is needed to organize without being manipulated and spied and so on and so forth. So basically what we did after Snowden, that's where the Trustless Computing Association came about, is to create the technologies that would enable to have the level of privacy, security, and democratic governance that you need to use IT for democracy. And in order to create these technologies, it's not enough, because who says that these technologies are actually that secure, that private? So you need to create a organization, a social structure that is democratic, reliable, and also technical savvy, that can independently certify that that is secure. So basically, the problem of making our technologies more private, more secure, and more democratic, it's one and the same with creating global democratic institutions that can actually guarantee that.
I think in a way, maybe it's even more. It's a fundamental cornerstone. Obviously, you have to be able to have that trust to do it. But at the same time, you also need that world citizen mindset that you mentioned sort of clicked with you when you suddenly discovered it.
Well, okay, in reality, the creation of infrastructure that enables global citizens to interact together and further their own interests doesn't necessarily need someone to be convinced that global democracy or world citizenship is a key thing. It's just enabling them to exercise their individual sovereignty on a global basis. So by creating a public digital sphere that enables them to practice the citizenship, you can enable global movements to further their own personal interests and aggregate interests, which would translate in constituent processes, social movements that would lead to world democracy. So not necessarily people using this technology would need to agree on the vision of world citizenship and so on, but they would just agree that problems are global, solutions need to be global, and we'll just have a tool to come together and actually draw up solutions to these problems.
I think what you said is key. When the automobile was invented, they didn't have to convince people that it's better than horse and buggies. It just naturally drew them to it. You don't have to say that what's wrong with horse and buggies. And I think that's the same thing that Bucky Fuller and Gary were talking about, that you don't fight the old order, You just create something so new that's so powerful and attractive that everyone wants to gravitate toward it. And as they gravitate toward it, the world changes. Is that how you see the Civic Net you're working on developing?
Yes, in a way, yes, but I understand how the majority of people in the world are very skeptical to this because the creation of an infrastructure that enables all of us to talk to each other, organize, and so on, may actually ultimately be controlled by a few people. In our case today, one guy, Mark Zuckerberg. And so basically, the cynical approach of most people about this kind of infrastructure, but also world democracy in general, is what if this world democracy would actually turn out to be a durable form of inhumane global governance? Let me repeat this. This is something that Richard Falk, a major theorist of global democracy, said. There's a major risk that any attempt to create a world democracy will create a durable form of inhumane global governance. So people say, oh, we better off staying in our states instead of creating a central authority, because if we make it wrong, there's no way to fix it anymore. But we have that central authority anyway. Global power exists anyway today, right? It's in the hands of a few individuals and a few nations. So it's not that global power is created by creating a new institutions or a global digital infrastructure for us to discuss. It is existing anyway, and it's leading us to disaster, right? So we have no other chance but give it a shot and create and embed in it all the checks and balances and the safeguards that we can to hope that it works.
Well, I love that idea that we create the new tool that creates these, gives us these safeguards, that gives us this interactive tools, and that in the creation of that tool and in making that attractive enough to draw people to it, change starts to happen. So that seems to be the key. What do you see as the key drivers that would attract people to wanting to join a platform like this?
Okay, so there are two layers to this platform. So we haven't described the platform in some detail, but basically there's two layers. So this platform would have an international institution which is democratically governed, which defines the levels of privacy, security, and democratic control of these technologies. And you would have to trust it because the governance is democratic, and we'll get into it. And this will create two sets of technologies. One set of technologies that anyone can install in their phone with an application that would enable them to discuss, organize, communicate without silos, with interoperability built in it, and with levels of privacy and security built in it, but also lawful access, right? Because you could have Trumpists. And I mean, I don't want to offend people in the call which are Trumpists, but I assume there's not many of them. But anyway, so there could be illegal activities which span from terrorism to insurrection, which can happen through it. So this governance body would actually guarantee all of that within this messaging and social network applications. And that is for the 99% of people. But then you have a 1% of people which actually need ultra secure and private environments, which can isolate them even from targeted attacks.
Now, before you go into that, when we hear the word 1%, everybody's thinking of that 1% would be that's controlling the world economically, the big moneyed interests. I think are you talking about a different percent of people, a different group of people?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, thank you for making that. We probably should use another reference to that. But basically, within society, you have active citizens like journalists, elected officials, political activists, which are way more influential in shaping the public sphere than the average individual, right? So protecting the ability of these individuals, the people that we elect, journalists, to not be blackmailed, spied upon, influenced, is essential for us as citizens. So we need to double up on them. right?
Mhm.
And so that's why these people in particular, they need an extra device, because there is no way with an app you can get that. Because even if this application is perfectly secure, no application can be more secure than the device it runs on. And all of our devices are broken by designs, are broken by design by nations for very good reasons. I mean, for very bad reasons, but also for very good ones. The very good ones are there is terrorism, there is insurrection. They need to, when it's needed, be able to spy. But the way they chose to do it is by breaking all technologies everywhere, all standards, so that not only nations can spy upon your elected officials and journalists, but even criminals, rogue states, and so on, creating a hackers republic. So the world is turning into a hacker republic. Those with the most hacking power rule the world. It used to be the financial guys behind things. Now you have those, and they work together. So anyway, complicated.
Wow, that's a very, very interesting point. And I think I'd like to hear a little bit more about how do we handle that. In other words, if you create a special device, and maybe you can describe it in more detail. Well, let's have you first describe it in more detail, and then tell us why this wouldn't be just a thing that the same criminals and terrorists we're talking about would use. How would we know that it goes mainly for the journalists and the people who really do need to be able to protect their sources and to help make a global democracy possible?
Okay, so this is a great question. So basically, the same trustless computing certification body, this independent democratic institution that will certify the level of security and privacy of these devices and the applications, would also certify procedures by which governments can request lawful access for, supposedly some of the users committing a crime. But this process would go through procedures that will be set by the international body, and ultimately need to convince 5 randomly selected citizens and an attorney, which are spec'd out and selected by this body, that would decide if the lawful access requests are justified, legitimate. And that gets complicated because it's international. We probably don't want to get into that, but
Okay. Well, so anyway, so as I understand it, what you're doing is you're trying to devise safety checks so that it's possible to have citizen input before sort of a kind of like a jury system, so that governments can't just go spy on people. And yet, if there is a real crucial emergency reason, that there is a way they could turn to the citizens in a way to get approval to do that. It's sort of like a jury system. Is that what you're essentially saying?
yeah, yes, absolutely. Thanks for giving me a chance to explain it better, because this is absolutely crucial. So basically, meaningful levels of privacy and security for our communication, which are constitutionally meaningful for exercising our political rights, require us to solve both the lawful access problem and the privacy. They need to be solved together. And currently, there are encryption protocols which provide levels of security, in theory, if implemented right, which are beyond any government's ability to crack. And this has made so that all the governments have been breaking everything so that they could make sure that these protocols could not be correctly implemented. Okay, so for example, you have applications like Signal, Telegram. You may have heard of these applications, which is ultra secure, and they implement very openly and clearly these encryption protocols. But then governments make sure that any device which is available in the world can be hacked into with a certain amount of cost and sophistication to spy on a certain individual, which is very, very dangerous. But still, this is a very murky, very obscure. And so we are basically creating a process which is transparent. So you're creating a certification body which sets the processes, and then ultimately you have a jury system of 5 randomly selected individuals, which are also in multiple jurisdictions, and it gets complex, whereby the government need to provide security and the right of privacy are balanced. Pretty much for the same reason the jury system was invented in the United States. It was invented because you needed some kind of level of citizen filter within the state overpowering certain rights, right? And so we're using it for the same reason, so that you have a filter that could reconcile these apparently impossible to reconcile needs of the privacy and sovereignty of an individual and the nation. And this brings me to one clarification. There's many people that are under the assumption that the right of privacy or the right of freedom of speech are absolute rights. They are not. There are very few absolute rights, like rights of freedom of torture. Even right to life is not an absolute right. If you go with a rifle in a bank and they'll shoot you, you have no right to life. They'll shoot you down, and fortunately they will do. So the right of privacy, like many other rights and the mandates in our constitution, need to be balanced to the others, right? So we need to find win-win solutions. And so this is something that has been missing in the discussion in cyberspace, and has been pitting, a whole host of people defending their privacy as an absolute right, and people defending, of course, safety and security. And so that's where basically this trustless computing certification body is tasking itself to providing both together.
Well, good. Well, one of the things, this is, of course, one of the key dilemmas we have is, as we build kind of a bottom-up, people-powered democracy, the kind of thing Gary was talking about here on the people-powered planet, we need a way that people can interact and how we balance these various issues. So it's great that you're getting into the nitty-gritty of that. I'm wondering if one of the key things, though, isn't that it seems to me that and one of the things Gary and I used to talk about is, as we develop a synergistic system, that is to say, people are coming together like we are now, not to say who's right and who's wrong, or argue, or to vote one way or another, but to try to together bring out our highest and best wisdom and amalgamate that into new ideas, and somehow when the group comes together to get even better ideas. So if you have groups of people all over the world, the more cross-cultural, the higher impact they have in these kind of integrity groups around the world, all seeking what are the best ways we solve problems. Somehow, by changing the conversation in that direction, it looks to me like, wouldn't that be a little less susceptible to the kind of political distortions we have? In other words, if it's win-lose democracy and all you have to do is get 51%, you'll lie, you'll do whatever to get that 51% voting that way on that one key thing, who we're voting for. But if instead you're having thousands of small decisions, how do we have cleaner air? And people are all talking about it. Well, how much can you hack how you have cleaner air? It seems like the dialogue and the discussion and the information interactive would automatically bring better ideas. And if somebody tried to throw in, we can have cleaner air by nuking the poles or something crazy, it would get sorted out, because too many people wouldn't buy that. Now, we have seen situations where people will buy something that's completely untrue, but it seems to me that maybe the key is more an interactive process that can really bring out truth. It almost seems to be as important as security. What do you think is, in terms of building this democratic platform, of how we can begin to shake out the untruths and help people come to at least know the common actual facts?
It's a fantastic and multifaceted question, and this was the main focus of my previous startup and association, Partex, Participatory Technologies. Before we knew how broken technologies were and how much this influence of state and companies were. So the goal is, how do we make these discussion spaces more conducive to distilling our collective wisdom, right? Instead of just going everywhere and so on and so forth, and basically creating deliberative discourse areas. So something that is conducing the discourse among persons, towards collective decisions which are wise and based on information which is based on evidence and science. So all of this is part of the picture, and it's part of the civic net infrastructure. And so that is also an essential part of it. So it is part of what the CivicNet and the Trusted Computing Certification Body will regulate, because basically this Trusted Computing Certification Body will not only certify the level of security and privacy of this means, but also govern this this discussion space. And so therefore, for example, enforce interoperability and enable, but just by enforcing interoperability, this is the key thing, it will enable companies to innovate in ways in which we should discuss and create collective wisdom. And instead now, basically, all our discussion need to happen in a few places like Facebook or Twitter, which are governed by a business model which is completely crazy, completely non-conducive for collective wisdom. By embedding interoperability, you will enable all kinds of innovation on different ways that people want to create consensus and so on and so forth. And so this kind of deliberate discourse will be enabled through it. It will be a challenge in itself, but our whole project is mainly focused on creating an infrastructural basis on top of which then you can have different political parties that have different ideas of what democratic organizing is. They can create apps which are interoperable. They're not just like silences.
Well, now it sounds to me like this adventure you're doing is a very large interactive challenge, and the very fact that you're even dealing with these questions and putting it together is a great challenge. And there are many other people around the world doing same things. We've had other people on our podcast struggling with the same concept of how do we begin to create these new digital platforms that can give us both security and move us forward. How much are you in the work you're doing interacting with and working with other organizations and people developing similar technologies?
Well, to tell you the truth, we are mostly focusing on creating a base infrastructure. So we're collaborating with companies like foundries, CPU makers, operating system makers to create a public democratic infrastructure for democratic citizenship, right? So enabling a cloud service, a device, an app that can respect your basic rights of privacy, security, and all that. On top of which you can have this kind of discussion happenings. Many of the initiatives that we've seen which pursue similar goals are very partial, are very partial in components, and we are interacting with some of them. Some of them are not based on blockchain will solve the world. Some of them are very kind of like not based so much on science and so on and so forth. So we're not interacting so much with let's say world ID initiatives and so on and so forth. So much that we are with technical partners and nation states. Because ultimately, in this international institution that we're creating, would be governed by, in part, by initial participating nations, randomly selected citizens to counteract both the representation of nations and the representation of randomly selected citizens, because democratic nations have a lot of democratic problem nowadays, right? And they will not do that. And so that's our main focus of interaction nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Well, it does seem to me that, as you mentioned, you want to work with nations, and yet nations in some ways can be the solution, and yet so often they're the key problem. We see how the United States was able to be manipulated into moving into a presidency that was not based on truth, based on fictions, and there seemed to be a loss of even meaning to whether things had to be true to be part of the discussion. It was very interesting that everyone is starting to struggle with this idea of how do you have interactive discussions that filter out untruths. And we saw a very interesting phenomenon in the later days with the previous administration, where the newscasters were actually saying, and right in the middle of his talks, he's lying. They actually, at one point, cut him off. That's not true. And so here you had newscasters being stuck with the responsibility in dealing with the public of notifying people that this wasn't true. Now, Gary, in his system that he was talking about of synergy, talked about syntegrity. So it was both synergy, where we come up with the best ideas, but there had to be the integrity part of it. The integrity is what gives it the tensile strength of the geodesic sphere. And I think that comes to the key. This discussion can only work if there is integrity. Is there some way that in future interactive apps like this, there could be tools that flash up? Well, first of all, if somebody's having an interaction where they're going at each other, instead of coming to conclusions, something flashes up and say, well, what are your common goals? How can you do that? Discussion things could pop up that help steer you in the right direction. And when there's untruths, could flag those and say, is that really true? Can you check the sources? If you had somehow something built into the interactive apps that could kind of keep us on target and do what the newscasters had to do in this last administration of tagging, the lies and keeping the discussion honest. Is there some way we could evolve in this as we develop the people-powered planet? Any tools that could move in that direction?
What you're referring to is something which is part of the CivicNet, because CivicNet will need to govern the rules of discussion in there, not only to promote deliberative discussion, so distillation of collective wisdom, but of course also collectively trying to determine what is most likely to be true. Now, there's no truth, absolutely, right? So, but you have to incentivize evidence-based, reference-based discussion. We all know about Wikipedia. It's very interesting the way Wikipedia is managed to try to maximize the fact that Wikipedia creates stuff that is truthful. For example, the posts need to be referenced, to certain accountable sources. So there's many different ways by which you can promote and highlight contributions which have bases on certain references, and for example then is embed into this discussion space source criticism. I don't know if you understand what I say by source criticism is, okay, I had a discussion with my wife the other day, and she says, well, I got this information on this and that, and I got it from WhatsApp and so on. But I says, but that is not correspondent to New York Times. And says, why should you trust the New York Times, right? Because every source of information is biased, because it has different owners, different economic incentives, different cultural biases, and at the very least, making those evident would enable people within the discussion to filter out different sources and what they mean in doing what they do, right? So all these systems could be embedded in it. There is, for example, an International Association of Fact-Checking. You may have heard of it, which kind of certifies a fact checker, because who's behind a fact-checking organization, right? Who's paying for it? You see what I'm saying? So it's a chicken and egg thing, right? But all of that can be, it can never be solved, but it can be improved 100 times in respect to what we have now.
Wow. Well, I think that's a beautiful answer, because it's so interesting to look at Wikipedia as a model. I mean, here's a model which, whatever defects it has, it's done something incredible. In the old world, it used to be that only, learned scholars could write for Encyclopedia Britannica. But now everyone in the world can interact in this platform, and yet it's not filled with hate speech and with people saying crazy things, because everything, as you said, has to be sourced. And if anybody spots something on it that's erroneous, they can detect it, and then there's an interactive process that takes it down. They actually did a university test where they purposely planted mistruths in various places throughout Facebook, throughout Wikipedia, excuse me, I'm sorry, wish they could do it in Facebook, where they put them in Wikipedia, and you know, within, I think it was 24 hours, they all got corrected, they all got verified. So there is a system, and that seems to be really, really fundamental to how we build global democracy. We need some kind of a cross-check system like that. We need in Facebook where the same kind of thing you have in Wikipedia, where everyone puts out some lies, some false thing. There's something that checks it, and it's great that you mentioned an international association of checking the fact checkers to make sure that they're not just someone paid off to put out phony facts. So we have a big challenge at hand, and I'm wondering if there are some. This might be a good time to turn it over to some of the questions from the audience, because you've raised some really marvelous questions, have some great ideas about how we begin to actually develop the tools to change it. Maybe, oh wait, one more question I wanted to ask before we turn it over to their questions. I just realized you didn't actually describe yet what the physical device would look like, the one that that you're proposing. Let's just show describe that, and then let's turn it over to questions.
So basically, this device is a 2-millimeter thin personal computer, which is like your phone, but is 100 times simpler in hardware and software. This enables us to have it verified down to the CPU fabrication trustless, where you're not trusting anybody. Everything is certified. It's going to have very simpler technology. You cannot play to the latest game on it or see 8K video on it, but you can actually practice your citizenship on it. And so being only 2-millimeter thin, you can embed it in a custom leather wallet, phase out, so you don't have to carry an extra device, or it could be embedded in your next phone. And I can show you now. So this could be your next phone. It's like just an Android phone on one side. It looks like it has a reflective screen, but then you touch a button and you have another screen that comes in the back, where you can, it's a very simplified interface, very Zenish, where you can have your messages. You can work on a decision making. You can work on a contract, on a legislative bill, or on a new article. If you're a journalist, then you flip around and you're back here. So it becomes extremely convenient, so that you don't have to carry a second device. You can, and once you're logged in the first time, you can just flip back and forth between one space and the other, because you know what the gyroscope is this little sensor that senses the movement of the device. So once you've logged in the first time, you put it in your pocket and it knows it's you still having a device, so you can move back and forth between your public sphere of information, your street and your square, and your private sphere of information, which is your bedroom, your living room, your political party discussion or stuff like that, or your the political party for elected officials and so on. So this is the main focus of the startup, right? And in order to fund it, we're also offering to a very rich people, which are very exposed to this, right? And so we'll get the rich dudes to pay it for the journalists and the elected officials. That's the plan.
Wow. Well, now I'm so glad that you actually showed us that, because I heard you talk about it, but I never saw that you actually have a working prototype, and it looks like a fascinating idea. And I'm sure there are many journalists who are doing important work in the world who would love to have some kind of a secure app like that, actually physical device they could flip around and do that work without having to worry about it being broken into. So that's terrific, and that is actually a startup that you're currently working on funding and putting together. What kind of what stage are you in?
We're working on the association, which is mainly promoting the certification body, which with events all around the world and engaging nations and other NGOs to create this international body. The startup is attracting investment to build this device. We have this prototype. We have 5 small angel investors for 160,000. We now have a round of 1 million, which is an interim round, for a 6 million round, which enable us to have 10,000 of these devices in the market. And these devices in the market will go to rich people and make them pay a lot of money. And instead, journalists and elected officials will have a very big discount. It's funny that ultimately it's in the interest of rich people, because to the extent that this device is not only providing privacy to the rich guys, then it's actually enable us to attract ethical hackers that will hire, and we have expectation that they will find a bug in it and will give it to us instead of to Putin. Anyway, so there are some interesting win-win dynamics in it.
Well, it's fascinating to be talking to a guest who is not only conceptualizing how we begin to build these bottom-up democratic institutions and make them so they are secure, and that they're actually increasing trust. You use the name trustless, but we have to be able to have a reason to trust them. And you're developing actual ways to be able to do that. So that is so fascinating. Well, with that, let me turn it over to Melanie, who will take questions. Melanie Bennett is our producer on the podcast, and also my producer on the film, The World is My Country, which I directed. And she will be going on to bring in the questions.
Thank you, Arthur. And Rufo, I think that we have all been part of something very special. To see that prototype in action, just phenomenal, just incredible. So thank you for sharing that with us. That was a big deal to see that for the first time, us together. Wow. Okay, so we do have questions for you. So let's go to Michael Walsh. Michael, please go ahead.
Hi, Rufo. Hello to Zurich, Switzerland. I have a friend there, several friends. Do you know Marcel Burer by chance of Swisscard? Marcel?
I know Swisscard quite a bit, but not Marcel in particular.
He's the CEO. We were roommates in Switzerland in high school.
Great. Well, they could be quite interested in this, so we should have a talk.
Yeah. I think he would be one of your clients. Anyways, I wanted to ask you specifically about that. You know, you have this device, and does it get the cell signal through the phone itself, or does it get its own signal? So that's the first part of the question. And then I want to ask you if you're familiar with Holochain, which is a platform for peer-to-peer privacy and decentralization.
This device is a completely standalone personal computer. So it's 2 millimeters thin. It has Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, NFC, so that it can go on the internet using your phone through Bluetooth or using any Wi-Fi. It's completely independent, and it does not have any physical ports. And that is crucial because you always have to assume that your phone is completely hacked, not by a nation, but by many dozens of cyber criminals that may want to. And so it's completely independent as far as connectivity is concerned. So even the device that I showed you, it seems like a single device. It's really two completely separate devices, which are assembled in the last weeks of assembly and with a permanent case around. As far as Holochain, we have a relationship with a few blockchain initiatives. We will use blockchain in our server side to increase the level of unerasability and integrity of the logs and the data that we have. Because it seems like lawful access is a crucial element of what we do. Otherwise, they will never let us go to market, and they should never let us go to market because this can be abused. And so law enforcement need to have a very high level of assurance that if they turn out to you and they ask for evidence, you cannot say, oh, well, we cannot find the evidence. And so blockchain can distribute this savings out there and then increase also the integrity. So we've been working with several companies, especially Definity in Zurich, but we haven't made a final choice on that. But we heard about Holochain, so we'll be glad to talk to them.
Great, good. Thank you, Michael. And so our next question, we have Dan. Dan, please go ahead.
Hey, thanks so much for the great presentations you guys do. I'm in Thousand Oaks, California. As you can see, I'm a ham. I put my call sign in there. I think ham radio is really a worldwide way to promote democracy. You know, we have an emergency net. We do every Tuesday night check in on the local repeater. I'm taking CERT training classes. And, you know, really the primary function of government is to protect health and safety in ways that individuals cannot achieve on their own. And with all the looming technological singularity issues coming. I think our governments are really falling behind in this sector, but fortunately there are two technological modes. One is the hashtag, which was invented in 2007, which allows you to put the pound sign in front of a string of characters and it aggregates that with all the other similar grouped hashtags. And the other is the digital twin concept, which was developed in 2003 at NASA. So I think if we take these two concepts and merge them, we can create privacy moderated digital twins which use rated hashtags to aggregate reputation and solution sets and bridge it with ham radio and radiograms for the digital divide people that don't have access to computers. You know, they can talk to a local ham and their hashtag can be put onto the worldwide democracy net that way. So, and I would also caution about blockchain. It's a very big energy hog. Every transaction on the blockchain takes about a month's worth of energy usage of a Canadian household. So there's three questions maybe you could comment about.
Yeah, so what you're proposing sounds very interesting. I'm familiar with the three technologies that you are suggesting, but I cannot wrap my head around how they would work together. So please contact me and tell me more about it. I would love to give a feedback. Blockchain absolutely is an incredible energy hog, but there are, as you know, there are new technologies on blockchain which are not the energy hogs, which are not as well developed, but there's been a huge amount of research on it. It's quite reasonable to expect very good advances and similar levels of security without having energy hog. And so that's the ones that we're referring to primarily. And so that's the ones that we are referring to.
Kind of a follow-up comment. You know, Twitter found that fake news is about 6 times more engaging than factual news. And one way to counteract fake news is to become more communicative with your neighbors and your local community. That's kind of the information, hygiene, digital hygiene immune system. If you get a large part of your information locally. I mean, I ran for city council, didn't spend any money, but I got 4,000 votes, and I'm planning to run again, just putting out these, high-tech ideas on the debate websites and things that they give access to candidates to. So
yeah. The problem you're saying it's clear, but it would be very easy to solve. The problem is that we have a political economics of media. We have business model of social media whose goal is just to promote as much engagement as possible. Before we had a digital space, we had some decent rules to regulate that. Now we had different ways to regulate it, which were very defective already. Now they're even worse. And so we know how to do it. So what I'm saying is that those are all very complicated issues, but the way they're solved now, it would be so easy to do something that is 100 times better than what it's currently. And so it's never going to be perfect, but if you apply a democratic governance with people that are experts, which set these rules and evolve these rules in time, because I'm not setting it, right? I'm setting a seed to create a governance that will set this around, because I don't have the answer. So the key is to create a seed of a governance model that can actually set the initial governance of this discussion space and create an inherent evolutionary process in it that will likely maintain a level of sanity, right? The founding fathers weren't that wise. They should have had maybe some other safeguards so they wouldn't get to Trump, right?
Oh, goodness. Well, yes, now we're quickly, because now we only have 10 minutes left. So I want to introduce to you someone who's here actually from Pakistan. We have Abdul's joining us today. It's very late over there. So I wanted to introduce him. He is a peace worker. He's working for peace and world citizenship in Pakistan. So Abdul, if you could just say hi real quick, that would be wonderful.
I am so happy you are joining the program. I am so happy, sir. I first time the Zoom meeting join. I am a peace worker in the world. I am social worker, activist. I since 2009 year is work in peace. And my area, children and poor children, and night time. But I watching to you, your program, your work is very good for humanity, and you are a good person in the world. All people are good men. I appreciate you, sir. Sir, my question is, how can we benefit human being in the world, people?
Very nice question. So, I mean, the quick answer is that among the many problems that humanity is facing, I think there are two main ones. One is personal growth. So the largest number of people should get more spiritually wise and aware and wise on themselves, and creating some global governance that is more sane, more democratic, and so these are the two main goals that we have. I am working on one side. I do meditation and so on and so forth, and I hope I'm doing some progress there. And on the global side, we should try to create some global governance, because unless we have a global democratic organization, the guys with the most guns and money rule the world like it is today, and that is leading us to destruction. Even those guys with the more money and guns, they're destroying the future for their own children, because the way we're heading, they're not even doing good for their own children, right? Because the greed is just so high. And so that's where, even though it may seem like far-fetched, no, rooting for world democracy is the best that we can do for our children and our children's, even if we are in the third world and we have more immediate needs and immediate things.
Let's go to Claire. Claire, if you could ask your question, please.
Yes, I'm wondering, you said that you would divide people by nations. I was hoping that you might do it by geographic area or some other mechanism to divide people up, because sometimes they just represent their own countries. And I'm hoping that maybe you can also just start with email for things that are less important for hacking and privacy.
I'm not sure I get your questions. Okay, number one, so the international institution we're creating, it's not so it will have a representation by technical experts about nations that can openly join, and so there's going to be initial nations and others can join and will have the same rights of the initial joiners, and there will be randomly selected world citizens in it. Right, so that's the idea. So that's going to be kind of the representation. Of course, then representation has different layers, right? Because global representation is not only done by nations, what nation you're born into and your passport, but there's many different representations. And I think the best thing is look at this picture here. Okay, you see this image of the world here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you see the colors on it. Some people ask me, so what are the colors representing? They're representing nothing. It's just an artist choice, right? Because you can divide the people of the world by whatever principle you want. Do they like cats? Do they like this? Do they like chocolate? So, I mean, you can divide. We're all human. We just all the differences, and that's why I love that, and that's why I put it up there, right? And but just for simplicity and also for realism, the world is divided in nations. You want to get something done, you have to deal with that. They are a representation of democratic representation to some extent. That's why we have randomly selected citizens. See, for example, in the process of selecting random sample citizens, I don't know if any of you have expertise in statistics. Creating a random sample is a very sophisticated scientific endeavor, right? Because you have to take in consideration so many different factors and so on. So I think that answers your question. And on the long term, we, in fact, on the phase 3 of the governance of this body, the representation of nations will dilute in time and more it would become in global citizens, now random sampled in a way that that makes sense.
Beautiful. Good. Thank you so much. That good question, and that was funny. We can divide it by people who like cats. Yes, now quickly we'll go to Jan, who is with Virtual State and was our wonderful guest last week. And Jan, if you could unmute yourself.
How do you start off? The global democracy, are you starting off on a very small scale with a few people? Or do you want a kind of a big bang approach? There was also a reference to Wikipedia, which also grew slowly. Have you any migration path in thought?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. In fact, the approach we're taking is an approach that could be summarized in an open human democratic union. So you have this certification body, which is democratic from the start, but democratic not from the members or users, but democratic globally for everybody. And then you have a bunch of users that use this to promote their own sovereignty and promote their own interests and start practicing and using it and find benefit in it and start associating. And then you may have more nations joining, and you just create this unit in such a way that whoever joins next as citizens, whoever joins next as nations have the same rights as the people that start. And as you create a critical mass of nations, then these nations can impose tariffs on the others, right? So they can say, okay, well, we're democratic. If you have kids work at $3 an hour, we won't let your goods come in, right? If you just develop runaway AI in this and that way, you will not do business with us, and so on and so forth. So anyway, so it's a very incremental, creating something that can become a seed and go onwards. No, that's as far as the ecosystem. As far as the institution, it's an institution that can actually set global security and standards and for law enforcement, which can be a standard globally, right? Initially recognized only by a few nations, so it can become an actual component of a future global governance. In the same way, like ICC tried to be. ICC, unfortunately, has been a huge failure. No, and not for their failure. I'm a good friend of the founder of the coalition and so on and so forth. They did great effort, but anyway, it didn't develop as it should have. But so creating a democratic governance in some areas of society. So there are these two different layers by which this can actually then grow into something bigger.
Great. Wonderful. Okay, one more question. We have Joseph. Joseph, you're the last question.
Appreciate your enthusiasm and your knowledge. I represent an NGO at the UN, and it's a big deal now to try to save indigenous people's languages. As you know, maybe there's 10 people that speak a dialect of Navajo, or in Russia, 10 people that speak a dialect of Inupiat. My question is, how can your technology help in help saving indigenous languages?
So the whole theory of the inventor of Esperanto is that by inventing Esperanto, that would take on an average 10% of the time that it takes to learn any other language. So if everyone would actually learn Esperanto, they could actually safeguard their own languages, because that would become the more universal one. Apparently during World War I, they were close to make it official, and I think only one nation vetoed it. We went very close. And so I imagine that at some point, during our collective efforts of many different organizations, Esperanto will come into play again as something to promote that.
So Joseph, I think as far as saving the languages, I think that goes with culture too. So to me, it's you're saving culture and language together. And
Right.
so that's just something we have to do. We have to do because, you know, it's beautiful to have the differences. I don't think Rufo is saying get rid of all the beautiful languages, right, Rufo?
Well, actually, I'm sorry, I gave a too simplistic answer. But basically, the whole idea of having a world government and also having a global language is the best way to preserve local language and local culture, right? Because nowadays, now our cultures in Italy or France and so on are completely overflowed by a few nations which have the more cultural power. The movie business in the US, my daughters, now they go and for many different economics, they have to watch Netflix and Amazon and so on and so forth, and they are completely embedded in this American culture way more than I was as I was a kid, right? And so by having a global government, it would isolate you from this dominance of a few powerful ones and so on. So it may seem counterintuitive at the beginning is that no, maintaining your culture, sovereignty, nationalism are best promoted by creating a global democracy. I think Yuval Harari, now this intellectual from Israel, he makes an incredible case for it. So if you are really a believer of sovereignty and nationality, you should be the #1 promoter of global democracy, which is the best way to better preserve your culture against the great powers outside.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for all your questions. Fascinating, wonderful. And now I'm going to go back to Arthur. Take it away.
Okay. First, just one little clarification. I think as I get it, you're talking about two different levels of this global democracy. One is a specific organization that ensures that everything stays secure. That organization is the one where you're talking about nations get involved and there's random citizens doing it and so on. This is the body that certifies, that keeps the whole system working. But the actual system you're talking about creating, the global governance system, is something that everybody on the planet could be involved in, not a few people. Am I correct that that's sort of the governing body that helps make the whole thing work? Is that correct?
Yes, basically what we are working on directly is this Trusted Computing Certification Body, which will certify certain apps that can go on your phone, the devices that we saw, and cloud infrastructure that creates a digital human communication space of messaging, social networking, deliberation, association, which are democratic, which are conducive to exercising your democratic right, including of building a world democracy, because we cannot do it on Facebook, right? We cannot do it on Zoom only, right? Because those are built to prevent that. So this international organization will govern the space, which will be used by whoever wants to use it. There's going to be some economics in it, which is going to be economics not based on advertising. People will have to pay for it. If you want truth, you have to pay for it. And so you will, people buy the Economist subscription or Financial Times, not because they're true, but they're truer than Facebook. And on the other side, on the wider picture of creating world institutions, that's something that we are just hopefully creating a seed of models for governance on one side. So this institution can create the seed of governance for other areas and creating the enabling tools for global organizing now to create democracy on a global scale.
Well,
so that's the task we have ahead of us.
That's excellent, and that's what Gary Davis used to talk about. He talked about global governance being a service, and he would point to the Postal Union, for example, or in later times he pointed to ICANN, the nonprofit organization that regulates all the URLs and all of our emails, so no two people have the same one, and the system works. You have to have somebody regulating it, but it's a nonprofit organization. It's democratic. It's worldwide, but it serves a service. So you're talking about a service that would make possible the interactive global democracy we're working on, and I think that's terrific.
Yeah. One little clarification, because now as I've described it like that, it may seem like, okay, well, you have one only institution that control all the communications that we have globally, right? That's a problem, right? So basically, it's more like a public digital communication infrastructure, like water, like a public broadcasting system. So public broadcasting systems in Europe, nearly every country has it, and they're wide. They have like 30% of the viewership are public broadcasters. They're not like just the content of the state. They're a platform where private content can build upon, right? So you create a basic technical infrastructure and rules for privacy, democracy, and security, on top of which any individuals, companies can innovate, people can dissent, and you can have also the counterbalance, right, from the private sector on the state control. Because one of the reasons we have Mark Zuckerberg controlling everything is that everyone is convinced that the alternative is the state controlling everything, right? And it's not the case. You need to find that kind of democratic space in which you harmonize that. We did find that balance before digital, and we're in deep sea now on this digital age.
Well, I want to thank you so much. I know we could talk all day about these concepts, but we're so pleased to have you here as a wonderful guest. Is it okay if Melanie puts your, would you like her to put the email address in the chat so that those people who want to follow up can get in touch with you?
Please do, and also put the website or association and the startup, and yeah, I'd be glad to follow up and answer to it. And I really thank you so much for the opportunity. I've been following this mission for such a long time, but I'm so deep into trying to get it done and so on and so forth. I miss so much, discussions on a high level. They also help me like refine what I'm doing and get the energy to go on, because that's what I'm doing. We're all on the same mission. So
excellent, thank you. Let me go ahead and just say a little bit about our podcast, and that is we're so appreciative and so much welcome everybody here. We do want you to join us every Wednesday for these special interactive, fascinating talks. And you can do that by going to peoplepoweredplanet.com and signing in at the bottom, and you'll get notices of all the future meetings coming up. There's both a chance to join our club or to try it out free down there. And I want to tell people about a special opportunity, and that is this movie that we've all talked about, The World is My Country, about Gary Davis, who's kind of inspired us to put all this together. We have a huge opportunity now where we're getting it on public television stations across the country in April. And in order to raise the funds we need to promote that widely, to make sure lots of the stations are making sure they run it in their local area, and to make sure that people know about the broadcast and come to watch the film, we have a GoFundMe going. And it's all, you can see it all on the page, theworldismycountry.com/Rotary. That's Rotary with a lowercase. Now, the reason it's /Rotary is you may have heard in one of our previous podcasts, we had Shekhar Mehta, who is the incoming president-elect of the whole Rotary for the world. And we think by having our film aligned with and helping work with Rotary, it's a great outreach of an amazing organization of people doing good around the world, who hopefully will then become also viewers and can help promote the world citizen idea. So to join us, please do join that GoFundMe, even if you're just kicking in, whatever you can, if it's $5 or $10 or it's 500 or 1,000, or we just had a wonderful donation of 2,000 come in this morning. So we do appreciate everyone being a part of that. The people who do give over 1,000 can actually, if they do it quickly, be mentioned in the broadcast at the beginning. You'll see when you go to that page, you'll be able to watch the beginning of the film, and if you sign in down at the bottom, you'll actually get to watch the whole TV version free in advance of the public TV broadcast. Well, thank you so much for joining us in this, and we do welcome you to come back each week. Do you have a final closing word for us, Rufo, or before we sign off?
Oh, that's fine. And thank you so much, Arthur. It's been very enjoyable. And it brings me back to the years of World Social Forum when we were young and conceiving these ideas, more than getting to the nitty-gritty hard work or trying to get it done. So So I'm really glad to hook up with this community. Thank you. Thank you, Melanie. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rufo. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.